getting ready for the second round of the playoffs here in season number 3, and after coming off of a 4-game sweep against the Boston Celtics in the first round, we were now taking on the 7th seeded Indiana Pacers, who upset the 2nd seeded Hawks in the first round, and they were led by their young, up-and-coming star who looked to be the future of this franchise in Paul George. With the higher seed, we were at home in Milwaukee for the first 2 games of the series, so let's head down to the court and see if we can pick up a win in game number 1. The first bucket in this game could start some early momentum as Darren Collison would knock this down for the Pacers, and they would be on the board early and often, as then Paul George would find the and one bucket, as it took us almost 2 minutes to get our first basket of this game. Thankfully, that seemed to be changing for us, as Brandon Jennings would bring this one up and he would knock down our first 3-pointer, but Darren Collison would knock this one from deep to answer right back. Fortunately for us, 3-point shooting was the main source of our offense this season, and we were pretty good at it, as rookie Edward Marsh would help extend this lead before the end of the first quarter, and we headed into the second quarter with a 3-point lead over the Pacers. We were hoping to extend more. Down by 1 though, with under 2.5 minutes to go, Hansborough would get in the paint for the Pacers, and that would give Indianapolis the lead right back, but Edward Marsh would find Larry Sanders in the lane, and that layup would fall, but we would take the lead right back from them. But again, Indiana seemed to be doing a great job of matching our 3-point shooting tonight. Tied up at 23 apiece with under 40 seconds to go in the first half, Darren Collison would get this layup to fall. Thankfully, there'd be no foul called on that though, as Dante Wooden would respond with a deep jumper, and with under 5 seconds to go, we had a chance to take the lead right before halftime, as Brandon Jennings would knock this shot down, and we would head into halftime with a 3-point lead over Indiana. We needed that momentum headed into the second half, as the Pacers had kept this a close one, and the 3-ball seemed to be heating up early in the second half here for us tonight. Brandon Jennings was shooting so great that he was starting to draw double teams, and although this shot from Carlos Delfino was off the mark, Larry Sanders would put us up by double digits. But despite that deficit, the Pacers were doing their best to try and fight the way back into this game in the fourth quarter. It seemed to be a futile effort for them though, as they just couldn't close the gap, and Brandon Jennings' amazing night would continue in the fourth quarter, as he was the main reason the Pacers couldn't get back in this one, and we would end up running the clock out here in the fourth quarter to walk away with a 56-43 victory in game 1, thanks in part to an almost 19-point double-double from Brandon Jennings. It was now time to see if we could pick up a win in game 2 at home, and hopefully Brandon Jennings' hot streak would continue, as he'd get us on the board with the first bucket of the night. Dante Wooden was getting involved in our offense early on as well, as he'd come off this screen from Jennings to knock down our first 3-pointer, but so far it had been a back and forth game with the Pacers in the first quarter. Wooden would come down the court on the fast break again to knock down another 3 to give us the lead, but we soon found ourselves down by 3 nearing the end of the first quarter, and one last shot from Smith at the right elbow would give us the lead headed into the second. The Pacers would get right to work though, as they'd take the lead early on here in the second quarter, and now that our bench unit was in, it was up to them to try to keep us in this game. That seemed to be a tough task tonight though, as Indiana was scoring at will against us so far, and it didn't help our momentum at all that Darren Collison would find Paul George for an and one bucket. Down by 3 points, this shot from Dante Wooden to get us back in the game was huge, but we still had a 2-point deficit to the Pacers here before halftime, and this 3-pointer from Danny Granger would put them up by 5, as it looked like we had some work to do here in the second half of game 2. We'd get to work right away with a pick and roll to Andrew Bogut in the paint, and then it was Lonnie Roberts on the fast break who would make it only a 1-point game. Indiana's offense seemed to slow down here at the start of the second half, but we hadn't at all, as that 3-pointer from Dante Wooden would finally give us the lead back over the Pacers. The rest of the third quarter had become a very back and forth affair between us and Indiana, as Paul George would finally give Indiana their first lead of the second half with this 3-pointer. Down by 1, we would leave it up to Brandon Jennings, who was having himself another amazing night here at home, as he'd get the lead right back for us. But just like the third quarter, the fourth quarter had been back and forth with us trading leads with the Pacers until this Dante Wooden 3, but that still left the Pacers some room to tie the game back up at 50 apiece. Up by 2 now, we had a chance to extend our lead, and Dante Wooden would knock down another big 3 for us, as one more bucket from Andrew Bogut on this pick and roll would extend it even more, putting us up by 6 now over the Pacers, as Paul George's shot would be off the mark and they would have to intentionally foul us, and Brandon Jennings would knock down all his free throws and help us secure a game 2 victory at home, with Dante Wooden having a huge game for us, knocking down 6 of 10 3-pointers for us, which would help give us a 2-0 series lead over the Pacers as we headed on the road. And taking a look at the other side of the Eastern Conference, Miami would take a 2-1 lead over the 76ers. It was time for our first game on the road in this series against the Pacers, and Brandon Jennings would get us started, but Danny Granger would respond right back for Indiana. Thankfully, our offense seemed to be getting off to a hot start tonight, as Brandon Jennings' great play through the first two games was continuing throughout the start of this game. If we wanted to win this game tonight, our three-point shooting would have to continue to be great, and it looked like it was so far, but unfortunately for us, it seemed like that was the case for Indiana too. The first quarter was a very back and forth affair between these two teams tonight, as Danny Granger would knock down one last shot to tie it up at the end of the first. Edward Marsh would pull up from deep to start the second quarter for us, and that's not something we've seen very much from the rookie this year, but now Indiana with a chance for 3 points, as Roy Hibbert would connect on that three-point play and then would get another bucket in the paint, and we now found ourselves down by 4 with less than 30 seconds to go in the first half, and that is where our deficit would stay headed into halftime. Indiana came out hot to start the second half as Paul George would knock down this three-pointer, and before the end of the third, the Pacers would go up by double digits. Our offense seemed to slow down from the hot start we had in the first half tonight, as we wouldn't get our first three-pointer of the second half until the fourth quarter here from Carlos Delfino. Down by 1 with under 2 minutes to go, Dante Wooden would strip Paul George here though on the fast break, and he would stop, pull up for 3, and would knock this down, as that shot would give us the lead, but Darren Collison would respond with a three-pointer of his own. As we were up by 1 with 15 seconds to go with a pick and roll here, Brandon Jennings would find Andrew Bogut for the bucket, but that still left 12 seconds for Danny Granger to come off and knock down this three-pointer. But we still had a chance with 9 seconds left as Brandon Jennings would get the double team. Robert's shot from beyond the arc would be off the mark, and that would now leave 4 seconds left for Indiana as Collison would drive the lane, pulling up from the free throw line. That would be no good, and we were headed to overtime where Andrew Bogut would get things started for us. I don't know what Indiana was doing as they left Dante Wooden wide open for 3 here, and then Larry Sanders would extend that to a 3-point lead for us as Andrew Bogut would find his way down a wide open lane for an easy layup, and with 32 seconds left to go, Indiana found themselves down by 5 as Bogut would get the defensive stop, and after we would knock down all our free throws, we would end up walking away with an overtime victory here in Game 3 against Indiana on the road. Brandon Jennings' great play in this series continued as he had a double-double with 22 points and 13 assists, and headed into this next game, we had a chance to sweep the Pacers here in Indiana, as Miami was also looking to close things out with a 3-1 lead over Philadelphia. So let's head on down to the court for Game 4 and see if we can sweep the Pacers here in Indiana. We would get off to a great start as Lonnie Roberts would get our first bucket from deep, but Paul George and the Pacers would answer right back with a 3 of their own. Indiana seemed to be on fire from beyond the arc to start the game tonight, as it was keeping them in this game all throughout the first quarter. Danny Granger would catch this on the fast break to eventually give the Pacers their first lead, but we would knock down one last shot to tie it up before the second quarter. Edward Marsh would bring it up the court to start the second quarter for us as he would knock down this deep jumper, and we would now have a 1-point lead, but Roy Hibbert would go to work in the post, drawing the foul, as the big man would give his team the lead back with that 3-point play, but that wouldn't last for long as Dante Wooden would get us the lead back, and then Larry Sanders would make it a 3-point lead headed into halftime. We needed to try to extend this lead as we were so close to sweeping the Pacers, and we were getting off to a great start in the second half as Dante Wooden would put us up by 10. That wouldn't last for long though, as Indiana would slowly claw their way back into this one, and to close out the third quarter, Darren Collison would make it only a 2-point game. What was once a double-digit lead for us now was only 4 points headed into the fourth quarter, and no matter what we seemed to do, we just couldn't pull away from Indiana as they were staying in this one. We were up by 6 though now with less than a minute to go, and Dante Wooden would make it 8, but once again Indiana was staying in it as Paul George would knock down this crazy off-balance 3. That would bring them within 5, and they would intentionally foul us, where Brandon Jennings would knock down both of his free throws for us, and thanks to that, we would hold on for a 7-point victory over the Pacers here in Game 4, as we completed the sweep and were headed to the Eastern Conference Finals, thanks to an almost near double-double again from Brandon Jennings in this game. But if we wanted any shot at winning the Eastern Conference Finals, Dante Wooden would have to step up his shooting from this game. It was time to see who would be playing as Philadelphia was down 3-1 but had forced a Game 7 against the top-seeded Heat, but Game 7 in Miami wasn't even close as Miami would blow them out, and once again we'd be matching up with the top-seeded Miami Heat in the playoffs, and the 3-seeded Kings would be taking on the top-seeded Thunder in the Western Conference Finals.